This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawler of Aquest and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. Following on from a recent discussion that myself and Danny had related to how the board of an Irish entity gets attention and assistance from a parent global organization. This time around, we want to talk about how the board of an Irish entity gets the relevant information and attention from their service providers. Because in a lot of cases, cybersecurity is not something that the board has direct responsibility or power over. They're very much reliant on their service providers to have this nailed. And the regulator is pushing hard on the board to make sure that this is being reviewed and that appropriate security measures are in place. So first off, Danny, what I wanted to talk to you about was just in general terms, when the board needs to, is accountable for something and needs to get information from service providers, where do they go?
Well, I think the first thing to reiterate just what you said there, Sam, was if something goes wrong, you can expect the first port of call from the regulator to be the board of directors. So they will be the ones that will be expected to answer the questions, and they will be the ones held accountable if something unfortunately goes wrong. I suppose from a board's perspective, two things come to mind. The first thing is that the regulator is very, very hot on diversity. Now, when they talk about diversity, people often focus on things like gender balance, but they also talk about the skill sets and the mix of skills on the board. And I guess a little while ago, that tended to be a real focus on legal and compliance and kind of fund administration type expertise, because we tended to have quite a lot of that in Ireland. That's expanded a bit now. You definitely see a lot more expertise in terms of portfolio management and fund risk management. But I think the next iteration of that expertise is around IT and cyber expertise. So the regulator looks at the diversity of experience and technical experience of the directors, and they would expect, be looking to see that kind of IT experience there as we go into the future. And the other thing to say is the regulator is very hot on cybersecurity at the moment. It's certainly one of the themes that they've issued a Dear CEO letter, as one of the themes that they spend quite a bit of time when they inspect firms, looking to see how well firms are dealing with things like cybersecurity. So it's something that should be on the agenda, and it's something that the board should either have expertise on or have access to expertise on.
So before we turn this into a sales pitch for someone like me, where else can the board go to get this expertise?
Well, I guess in an ideal world, they would have a director who has this kind of experience and who's on the board and has skin in the game and head in the block the same as everybody else. In reality, they tend to get support from the group. So usually the fund is part of a promoter group, or it's promoted by a financial services entity that's large enough to have an IT and probably a cyber department. And so often the first port of call is to go there and leverage off the experience and expertise that's in-house. To kind of support that, then you might find that that the board will want cybersecurity on the annual compliance plan or internal audit plan, so that it is something that gets extra attention this year or next year, and attention by expertise, whether that's internal within the group, also looking at how their service providers, their other delegates deal with cyber, or whether it's something they bring in their external auditors to take their IT and cyber expertise to cast their eye over how well the cyber has been managed for the fund across the main delegates and wider than that. So there is access to expertise out there above and beyond the likes of a independent cyber expert being engaged just directly by the board.
And would you ever see a fund, the board of an organization, nearly going to one of their main service providers and asking them to cover this for them? So, let's say there's a fund board and they're very reliant on the ManCo to do most of the day-to-day operation activities. Have you seen boards kind of relying on the ManCos to cover this for them? And do you see any potential conflict there or gap there?
Well, for most funds, it's the fund management company is the primary service provider. And so they will, because funds are products, they're not operating companies, they will have assigned and delegated to the fund management company carry out the activities that need to be done in order for that fund to operate, which is usually managing the investments and managing the shareholders. And so it's in the first instance, it's the fund management company that's responsible for everything, including cyber and the day-to-day activities that keep the investors safe, albeit that the directors of the fund will be accountable for it. So that's your first port of call, and the board will look to the fund management company and will rely on what they say. But
yeah, so I mean, if the fund board is being held accountable by the central bank, can the fund board turn around and say, well, here's the fund management company and what they're telling us about cybersecurity, and while fair enough, we're accountable, the fund management company has given us assurances, so that's that. We don't need to have the expertise on the board. We can trust the word of the fund management company.
Well, I guess I'd throw the question back. If it were another area, would you look to have expertise on the board and look to validate what you're being told? Because you've got to remember that there are conflicts of interest. There's going to be the interests of each person who's got cyber management in their firm, whether it's a fund administrator, investment manager, or fund management company, to tell you that everything is as it should be. So you will, I think, as best practice, want some external validation of that and want to know that everything is the way that it's being presented to you. You could rely fully on the fund management company, but if that's going to be your approach, I think I'd be more comfortable with that if I had technical expertise. There's our 6 minutes.
Okay.
Technical expertise at board level. If I was to blindly rely on a fund management company or any other service provider, that would make me uncomfortable. And I'd certainly want to ask.
It's interesting because it's just occurred to me that in a lot of cases when I go to clients, they're relying on their IT provider, their IT MSP, to certify to say that security is being managed. And it doesn't take long as an independent observer or assessor to see that they're just telling you they're doing what suits them. They're not telling you that what they're doing is appropriate to the firm. So to wrap up,
question for the directors to ask.
Yeah. To wrap up, Danny.
I suppose to wrap up, the thing to bear in mind is that the board will be held accountable when something goes wrong. So you need to make sure you can sleep at night knowing that you've done the best that you can for the investors in the fund. And that might mean having expertise on the board in terms of IT and cyber. If it is not that, it is something else that manages, mitigates, eliminates, and monitors the risk around cyber, whether it's access to an independent expert or having it on the compliance annual agenda and having it validated by an external party or auditor. But it has to be on the agenda, and it has to be something that the directors are engaged in and that they're comfortable they're in the best position that they can be.
Okay, that's great, Danny. Thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Sam.